Everyone, and welcome back to the DAO Adventure. My name is Sebastian. I am education lead at Code & State, and I'm here to help you build a DAO on the internet computer in 7 days. Today, we are building the foundation for your DAO. This is project 1 out of 5 from the training. If you are not familiar with the DAO Adventure and the 3 phases that you see here, initiation, training, and graduation, I suggest that you watch previous videos from this playlist. Today, we are focusing on the training. The training is optional, but strongly recommended. We are building 5 guided projects, so I will be coding and showing you how to implement those projects in Motoko. The goal of the training is to get you ready for the graduation, where you will build and deploy your own DAO. And if you successfully graduate, you will receive your Motoko Bootcamp Diploma. All right, so for today, we will answer a simple but fundamental question about your DAO and your project. And this question is, what is your dream? How do you want to see the world change? What is your vision for the future? What are you excited about? And what kind of community and project you want to build? This is fundamental for your DAO. This is the foundation of the direction that you will go and what people you will surround yourself with and what kind of project you will build. So think about it. I won't be, of course, answering this question for you. This is a personal question, so you have to find out for yourself. I will be showing you the methods and the code that you will implement for this project, but the specific answers and variables that you have to implement, you have to find out by yourself. As always, we will use DAO Adventure training repository. This repository can be accessed from the browser directly, so we will use Gitpod for today, and just like we've done with previous projects, I've done a video where I explain how to set up this cloud-based environment. But once again, the same process. I click on Gitpod, then open the Gitpod environment, select my repository, Visual Studio Code as editor, standard as the machine, and then just click on continue and it will load the workspace. Make sure to use Firefox or latest version of Chrome. Sometimes you can face issues. Sometimes it's loading forever. If you have some issues, just refresh, clean your cache and start again. Now you will see this installation going on, so you can wait 2 or 3 minutes maximum. Okay, so my Gitpod is ready. I can run a clear command just to make sure that the terminal is clean. I will also reduce the size of the terminal, zoom in a bit for you. After that, you can take a look at the folder called days. Today we are building the project number 1, so day 1, then projects, and then main.motoko, so main.mo. You can also grab project.md, so md for markdown. This is where the code and the text about your project is specified. We can close the Explorer and close the terminal for now. If you want to take a look at the instructions for the project, I recommend that you click on this icon. This will open the project.md, but in a preview format, so you don't have access to the markdown, but actually the text, so you have a better view here. And on the left, you have the Motoko code. Welcome to the Motoko Academy. We are thrilled to have you here. As you stand at the entrance, a large luminous hologram meets you. Behind the glow of the hologram, the large hall opens up, filled with energy and innovation. You first notice the screens filled with lines of code. It's not just display, you can see live feeds of ongoing projects showcasing the real-time development of groundbreaking applications and systems. This all isn't just a typical classroom, it's clear that this is a place of growth, discovery, and connection to something greater than oneself. While you are lost in your thoughts, the artificial voice from the hologram gently asks, what is your dream? Today is time to grow and develop your vision. Your task, should you decide to embark on this journey, is to lay down the foundation and the direction for the DAO you are about to build. We believe that a strong foundation is key to creating a successful DAO, and it all starts with a clear and well-defined dream. So take this moment to reflect. What changes do you aspire to see in the world? What is your personal vision for the future? If you had access to unlimited resource, what would you be passionate about doing? If you had the backing of a large community, what kind of project or initiative would you like to undertake? This is the mission, so this is what you will achieve today. Now let's get a little bit more specific in terms of what we will need to implement in the code and what are the requirements for today. So today we need to set a name for our projects and a clear mission statement. This mission statement will be called the manifesto. Our DAO has a set of goals, so we will need to have a list of goals that will help us achieve the mission, so the manifesto. And anyone is able to query the name, manifesto, and goals of your DAO. So essentially anyone will be able to query the canister where those information are stored and access the name, manifesto, and goals of your DAO. Those are the requirements. Now the task is a very specific and very guided list of tasks that you need to essentially do to fulfill the requirements and the mission. For example, the task number 1 will ask you to define a mutable, immutable variable name of type text that represents the name of your DAO. So assuming you want to do task number 1, you need to take this time the Motoko file main.mo and specify your immutable variable with the name. It's of type text. And so you can specify the name that you want. I will go with Motoko Bootcamp DAO. Task number 2 is defining an immutable variable. So this time it will be with var, and this time will be a manifesto. And we want to empower the next generation of builders to make the DAO revolution a reality. That's it for the manifesto. So then you have more functions. So for example, the get name function, the get manifesto, set manifesto, add goal, get goals, and so on. The interface is the last section of the project description, and the interface is very important because you need to make sure that you respect this interface if you want to submit your project on the Motoko Bootcamp dashboard. Any project that does not respect this interface will not be accepted by the dashboard. So you need to make sure that you follow exactly the types and the name of functions that are here. So we can verify, for example, get name. So the type, we don't take any type. So shared query. So this is a query, shared query here. We can have it here. Then we don't take any arguments and we return asynchronous text. So this is what we have here. So get name is correct. Get manifesto is similar and looks similar here as well. Set manifesto is slightly different this time. It's not a query, and also we have one argument manifesto. It doesn't matter if the argument name is not the same here and here. This is not a problem. The only thing that needs to be the same is the type of those arguments. So this is a text, and also the return value is the unit type in both cases. So we are correct. Add goal. So we have a goal of type text. We have a goal of type text. Again, it's not the same name for the variable, but it doesn't matter. And the return type is unit, and it's unit here, so it's correct. And finally, get goals, shared query, takes no arguments, and it returns an array of text. So we have the same interface. Usually the project will be structured in a way that the starting file, so the Motoko file, contains the interface that you have here, but just make sure that it's exactly the same. And if you modify any function, you need to make sure that you respect the names here and also the types. All right, so at this point, I will let you complete task number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then submit your project if it's correct. You will need to use a buffer, so take a look at the buffer documentation if you need to. Otherwise, take the time, pause this video, and I will move to the correction. All right, so we are at the correction. I hope you've succeeded in implementing this project. If not, don't worry, I will correct it right now, and I'll explain everything. So we already have the structure for our functions, and the only thing that we need to do is complete those functions and implement them. So I'll start with the task number 3. We have already done task number 1 and task number 2. I just wanted to show you how to define those first 2 tasks. So we have already done that. Now the next task is task number 3. Implement the getName query function. This function takes no parameter, so we don't have any parameter, and returns the name of the DAO. This is a text. So we can just return name instead of returning not implemented. Don't forget the semicolon at the end of the return and also at the end of the function, but we already have it. So that's it for task number 3. Task number 2, implement the get manifesto. This is gonna be similar, as you probably already guessed it. So return manifesto. Task number 5, implement the set manifesto function. So the set manifesto can be called by anyone and we can set a new manifesto. This is not necessarily something that we want, so we will see later in further projects that we want to make sure that only some people only through vote can change the manifesto. But for this video and for this project, we want to make it possible for anyone that calls this function to set a new manifesto. So the new manifesto is passed as an argument and we can assign it to this manifesto variable. We use the reassignment operator and the new manifesto. So this equal sign is essentially the reassignment operator. So you can only use it once you have already defined a variable. So this is already the first assignment was here. And then we reassign the value, so we change the value of the manifesto. After that, you can return. In Motoko, you can also just leave it like this because Motoko automatically returns the function, but we can make, I think, the code more clear if we just put the return here. So that's it for the task number 5. For the task number 6, we need to define a mutable variable goals of type buffer text that will store the goals of our DAO. So this is the first time that we need to import a module. To import a module, you need to import before the actor declaration, so before the actor keyword, and essentially here we don't necessarily need the class, so I can just put actor, it's fine. And we can import buffer, mo base buffer. So this is how you would import a file from the base library. So mo for Motoko, then base for the base library, and / the name of the module that you want to import. The name of the import can be anything. We could import B, we could import buff, but I like to essentially make the same name here and here. And now we have imported buffer. All right, so I am in the Motoko documentation, Motoko base library reference. I am in the buffer documentation. So each module that we can import has a dedicated page. So for example, array, blob, bool, character, error, and you have a lot of that hash map that we will see later, int, and so on. So right now I am in the buffer module. The base library is very important in Motoko because those are some of the data structures and modules that you will use the most, but those are not the only data structure and modules that exist. You also have community packages, and you can also write your own module, as we will see later. So for each function in this module, you have a specific explanation and a specific example. For example, we can look at size. Buffer.size will give us the size of the buffer, buffer.add will add element inside the buffer, and so on. But first, maybe we want to take a look at what is the buffer. So there is an explanation here. The buffer in Motoko is a class that provides a mutable list of elements of type X. So X here is a generic type. Essentially, you can replace it by text, natural number, Boolean, whatever you want this X can be. In our case, it's going to be a text, as you've seen here. So we are going to store text. We are going to store goals in the form of text. This class wraps and resizes an underlying array that holds the elements and is comparable to array list or vectors in other languages. So this is if you're familiar with other languages. When required, the current state of a buffer object can be converted to a fixed size array. This is recommended, for example, when storing a buffer to a stable variable. So if you don't understand this sentence, no worries. Throughout this documentation, two terms come up that can be confused: size and capacity. Size is the length of the list that the buffer represents. Capacity is the length of the underlying array that backs this list. So essentially, buffer is a class that is built on top of array. So we don't need to exactly understand how it's built. If you're interested, I can provide you the link to the base library. And this is where you will see the code of how buffers are implemented. But you don't really need to care about that. The only thing you need to know is how you can define a buffer and how you can use a buffer. So this is how we can define a buffer. We need to import it and then let buffer is equal buffer.buffer, specify the type that you want inside the buffer and the capacity. So this is the capacity. In our case, we can define it here. So we need a mutable variable, so variable goals, which will be of type buffer.buffer text. And it's equal buffer.buffer text. For the initial capacity, I will always set 0. This is a personal choice. Essentially, it doesn't really matter because as long as the buffer exists, it will automatically grow to accommodate for the elements that you put inside. So in this case, it will start with an underlying capacity of 0. I will attempt to add an element inside, it will automatically grow. Usually, if you already know that you will have some elements to start inside your buffer, you can set the initial capacity to the number of elements. For example, if we want to start with 10, we could set 10. But I will always put 0, this is a personal choice, and the buffer will automatically grow. It's not a problem if you put 1 or 5 or whatever, it's the same. So this is how you define a buffer, and you might be wondering, why do we have buffer.buffer? So it's because we are importing the buffer class from the buffer module. So this is the module, and the second one is the class. Buffer module, buffer class. Essentially, if you want, we could do something like this. If that makes the syntax more clear. I will put it back to buffer because I like to use buffer.buffer. Okay, so that's how you define a buffer. Now to add element inside the buffer, we've seen this function called buffer.add. So this is the second function in the list, buffer.add. Add a single element to the end of the buffer, doubling the size of the array if capacity is exceeded. So that's what I was explaining. Essentially, Whenever the underlying array is at full capacity, it will automatically grow. We don't need to worry at this point. So I'll just do buffer goals.add and then new goal, and then I'll just return. Of course, here we need to make sure that this is a text and this is specified as the argument, so we don't need to worry. This is, of course, going to be a text that is added inside. We couldn't add an element of type nat, for example. If you try to do goals.add 5, this is a natural number. Literal of type nat does not have expected type text. So once again, Motoko is a type language, and so if you have a buffer containing text, you can only add text element inside. So that's it for task number 6. We have also implemented task number 7, which is add goal. Now we only need to do task number 8, which is the last task of today. Implement the getGoals query function. This function takes no parameter and returns all the goal of your DAO in an array. First, I would like to explain why do we need this function and why are we returning an array of text? Why are we not returning the buffer like this? Because we could totally do return goals, and so we would return the buffer. But if you look at this, we have an error shared function as non-shared return type. So buffer is a class. In Motoko, you are not able to share classes. Why? This is related to this specific page of the documentation, mutable states. Each actor in Motoko may use, but may never directly share internal mutable states. So this sentence might be complicated if it's the first time you are reading about the actor model. If it's your first programming language, you might find this sentence complex. But essentially what it means is that any mutable data, so any variable that is mutable or any class, cannot be shared outside of a canister. Why? Imagine that we could share this buffer. Imagine that you could send it to another canister or even to a user. Then this user would be able to call any function on it. So for example, it would be able to call .add, and it would be a huge mess because you wouldn't know who is calling .add at which point. So for example, people could add elements inside your buffer without your original code being aware of that. And so now imagine that this is a situation that is generalized to multiple objects, multiple variables, and multiple canisters. This would quickly become a mess, and the internet computer would be a very complex places for developers to build. So this is why we have this simple rule from the actor model that is implemented directly in the Motoko language that each actor in Motoko may use but may never directly share internal mutable states. So how do we solve this problem if we still want to share the goals? You still want to be able to share the contents of the goals. So we will not directly share the variable, but we will share the contents of the goals. And usually a data structure that is very recommended and adapted for solving this specific problem is the array. And that's why we will usually convert any type of data structure to an array and share this array outside. Essentially, we are taking a snapshot of whatever is inside the buffer, and we are sharing that to the outside world. If you take a look at the buffer library, you will notice that there are two functions to convert a buffer to an array. There is buffer to array and buffer to array. So what is the difference between those two functions? So one of them is a function that is functional. So essentially from the buffer module, it would be buffer.toArray, and then you specify whatever buffer you want to apply the method to inside the parenthesis. The other one would be more of a class, so it would be a method that you can call on the buffer. And I can show you that. So if you go up here, .toArray. .toArray is a function that you can call on your buffer. So essentially, you would just do goals.toArray. But this function is deprecated, so I will need to do like this. Field toArray is deprecated, use the static library function instead. So the static library is the one I was talking about, which is buffer.toArray of goals. This is the correct way to implement our getGoals function. You might be a bit frustrated by this documentation and by those same functions, the static and the class method type of function. And why do we have those deprecated? This is because Motoko is going through a refactoring of the base libraries, many modifications, many improvements to the language. So this is a temporary situation. Don't worry, this is only the case for buffer. You also have a few other deprecated functions that I'll talk about during this training. But essentially, this is the drawbacks of using new technology and new languages. So bear with me, you will survive that. All right, so that's it for the code of project number 1. Now we can try to deploy. So we can deploy directly without paying anything, directly on the playground. And to do that, we can run the command dfx deploy -- playground. So this is a flag. And then the name of the project, which is project 1. If you want to know where this name comes from, this is because of the dfx.json that is specified here. Here we have the list of the canisters contained in this project, in this repository. And so the first one is project 1. I specify where the main file is located and that the type is Motoko. And so the main file is located in days, day 1, solution main.motoko. It should be project main.motoko. So that will be corrected directly by a pull request. Okay, so this is creating a new identity because this is the first time I'm using this playground, this Gitpod environment. And it's deploying my canister. I have a warning from the base library, but this is not something we need to care about. And now I can access the interface of the canister directly by accessing this candid interface. So for me, this is blocked due to some restriction of Firefox, but I can copy and paste the canister URL. So this is the candid UI, and then this is our canister ID here. And you can see the interface. So this is the project that we have built. The project that we have built, we are able to query the goals. So this is a vector. This is essentially the representation of an array in Motoko. An array in Motoko becomes a vector in candid. So here we are seeing the candid type. And we can essentially add goal, so finish project 1. This is an update call, so it will take longer, around 2 seconds, and then we can query this, and we have this goal inside the vector, and we can add more goals. Then we are also able to query the name of the DAO, so Motoko Bootcamp DAO, and the manifesto, empower the next generation of builders to make the DAO revolution reality. We can also set the manifesto, finish and graduate 1,000 boot campers. Again, this is an update call, so it takes slightly more time, and then we can query the manifesto with the getManifesto function. Also, we have added this goal, so I can verify, finish project 1, finish project 2. And that's it. So that was the project number 1. I hope that you've learned a lot. I see everyone in the next video, and in the meantime, keep building.